What's up, squad? This is Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, for today's conversation, I really want to reference one of our Amazon products. As you know, we put out geopolitical puzzles, like the Holy Grail, the Bible of geopolitics, quick, succinct way to really get to understand the basis of geopolitics. And for today, we'll be looking at Latin America and the Caribbean edition of that puzzle. So as you can see, it's going to have a puzzle of all of the countries with images and icons related to those countries, their history, telling their story and how these countries arrived here from a geopolitical point of view. And each one of those puzzles come with their own booklet. So in the booklet, it details the imagery that's going to be on the puzzle. So I quickly wanted to reference Venezuela because in Venezuela, one of the images that we use is a German warboat. And we use this to reference the Venezuela crisis of 1902 and 1903, where a naval blockade was imposed against Venezuela by England, Germany, and Italy between December 1902 and February 1903 due to debt evasion. The United States had to arbitrate the dispute to prevent a possible invasion and occupation by a European power. So if you have a chance, go to Amazon, make sure you check out our geopolitical products. But that really sets the state of what we're discussing here about geopolitics and what just occurred. So for those that don't know, last night was started off as a skirmish between U.S. forces carrying out coordinated and strategical attacks in Venezuela actually turned out to be an ouster. When the smoke cleared and after some on-the-ground video footage leaked of attacks by U.S. forces, small skirmishes on the ground from air power, as well as Chinook choppers in the air, what was revealed and confirmed by communication from the Trump administration was President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela and his wife had been in U.S. captivity. They've been captured. So the lone leader, what some would say the contentious leader of Venezuela as far as the United States is concerned, has finally been put under U.S. basically U.S. domination. U.S. went in, they took them, and now Venezuela has a new chapter to live. So I think it's very interesting because this was all going to be a lead up. So we know that we got here from a number of ways. And let's start with Chavez, Hugo Chavez, the former president, the deceased president of Venezuela. He assumed power after a failed coup. He did assume power, getting elected in the late 1990s, early 2000, and taking that mantle of leadership. And in 2010, to surprise to the world, Venezuela overtook the much perceived and highly the reigning champion of oil reserve, Saudi Arabia. Venezuela in 2010 announced that they had surpassed Saudi Arabia in proven oil reserve. Up to that point, Venezuela had been a junior producer to Saudi Arabia, but due to technological innovation, because Venezuela has very, very heavy oil, due to technological innovation, Venezuela shot to number one overnight and went from 100 billion barrels of proven oil reserve to 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, shooting them to number one, surpassing Saudi Arabia and becoming the number one country as far as oil reserve, consuming or holding 18% of the world's proven oil reserves, dropping Saudi Arabia down to second place with about 15%. So you have this situation. Now, the following year in 2011, it was announced that President Chavez had become very ill with cancer. And he struggled in that battle for many years, famously seeking treatment and medical services in Cuba. But he eventually succumbed to his illness and passed away in 2013, leaving the country in the trusted hand of his chosen successor, Nicolas Maduro. Now, Maduro has been what some would say probably not as charismatic. Of course, it's very hard to follow up a revolutionary leader such as Hugo Chavez in the eyes of the people that supported him. But there were a lot of challenge elections. And in 2019, the West, led by the US, really tried to put in a supposed winner, President Juan Guaido, put Juan Guaido as the leader of Venezuela from what was perceived to be his one victory. But Maduro, not holding too much power at the time, refused to concede, holding the military and having institutions backing him. He refused to concede any power. So that effort went nowhere. Now, President Trump, since his ascension into leadership, he has heavily targeted. So there has been skirmishes, as I said, that Juan Guaido, trying to get Guaido in charge of Venezuela in 2019, that was under a prior administration. But this shows you that the U.S. slowly been inking or inching towards replacing Maduro as far as leadership. Now, there could be numerous reasons why they didn't try further or why it's so pertinent now, which we'll go into in a little bit. But what happened is the U.S. has slowly been ramping up. And I've been noticing this, and I've called this out in some of our videos, as we were talking about, because the guys that would use the narrative that was pushed was this was have to do with drug trafficking. Anybody that has read anything about U.S. Drug trafficking knows Venezuela is absolutely irrelevant when it comes to the U.S. drug trafficking. But also you saw the gangs. I noticed that because a lot of the drug trafficking is expected to be routed through the Pacific side or through the Central American countries and Mexico. So that is really the heart of it, not Venezuela. And a lot of those drugs are perceived to come from Colombia. Now, under the guise of fighting drug trafficking as well as gangs, and that's another thing is a lot of the cartels, they're not really based, the big gangs are not based in Venezuela. They're based in Central America, Colombia, and Mexico. So a lot of the gangs that deal with these drugs aren't based in Venezuela. But President Trump went out his way to include groups such as Tren de Aragua in his terrorist group and organization, which basically allows the opportunity to heighten the threat that Venezuela poses to the U.S. and justify extraordinary military action inside the country. As well, there's been a buildup of military off the coast of Venezuela. Ships have been stopped, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this was all, I believe, was an environment to really put pressure. I don't think Trump wanted boots on the ground. Of course, I think America was in a very strong military position in contrast to Venezuela for numerous reasons. But whenever there is war, there is risk. And also when you have boots on the ground, you risk public opinion turning away from you because things can happen. All war is risk. And things can happen. And as the casualties start to mount up, people start wanting their children back home and they get tired of seeing dead American bodies and they start to ask, why are we over there in the first place? With a situation like this, those questions really arise, but they really don't justify a response because everything happened so quickly. This was a blitzkrieg exercise. It was in, out. Everything happened within a night. And that's why I say you can't trust the narrative of anything. For all we know, with the mounting pressure, because imagine this, right? The basis of power in the country, of course, as we say, is the military. Because they got the guns, right? So when you're sitting there, you're looking at the world's most powerful military build up off your coast, or the world's most technologically advanced military build up off your coast, threatening to come in, take over power, right? And basically it's going to put you on trial as a war criminal for whatever reason, because power precedes law. So when they take over, just like in Iraq, they invalidate your rule and say you're a criminal. So you're looking at that. So it's either that or just get rid of the guy that's in charge right now. And who knows, you probably don't like him anyway. So for all we know, we just saw a picture of Nicolas Maduro in custody of the U.S. forces. But for all you know, Nicolas Maduro could have been gift wrapped and sent to the United States. They said that it was a clandestine operation. But for all we know, and they'll probably come up with a movie that makes it a very glorious one indeed. But all you know for sure is that Nicolas Maduro is in U.S. custody. And for all you know, he was turned on by his own supporters to avoid an all-out war in the country. I think a lot of what President Trump was doing was ramping up the heat, ramping up the energy with inside Venezuela to try to get the insiders closest to Nicolas Maduro to turn on him instead of suffer the consequences of a war with the United States. This is only subjective. I don't have any inside knowledge to such a thing, but I think there's a very common logical cause because this was so quick. It was so quick, it was almost no resistance, as if there was a complete concession to some degree or another. And I know Nicolas Maduro didn't give up himself. So it's very highly possible for me that some of his higher ranks and people at the upper echelon of the oligarchy decided it was best for him to go, and they decided to cut their losses. Now, why did this happen? I think there are many reasons, and people will purport why they think, but Venezuela is what I like to call a low-hanging fruit. And when I mean a low-hanging fruit, I mean this is the jackfruit of fruits. This is an ample opportunity. Never have the ROI been so good to the United States as far as you have a country which is operating inside pretty much America's South China Seas, the Caribbean Sea, and it's highly close, no real threats of boots on the ground. You're dealing with a smaller population. Venezuela is highly urbanized, which means that they're very subject to pressure from the outside. People that live in cities, they don't produce their own goods, not highly industrialized. They're more consumers. They're more subject to coercion because they depend on supply line and resources from outside of the cities. Cities are people centers. They're not support centers or industrial centers. So when you see this happen, as opposed to a country like Russia, which is a massive country, and there's people everywhere in this vast swaths of land, or you have a situation like Vietnam, where it's not a massive country, but you have this working in the thickets and jungles and mountains of Southeast Asia in a foreign land on the other side of the Pacific, with a population whose numbers are inversely flipped. During the Vietnam War, Vietnam was less than 20% urbanized. When you're looking at a country like Venezuela, who's somewhere between 75-85% urbanized, or 80 to 90% urbanized, and you look at another 75-85% of the country that lives within 60 miles of the coast. So this makes them very subject to air power, very subject to naval pressure. You really don't have to go in deep, chase these guys down like the Japanese had to do with China during World War II. The land isn't big enough. Yeah, they have the Amazon, but the Amazon is only about 14% of the country. So they're highly urbanized. They're on the coast. So it was relatively easy as far as an invasion point of view to invade, because you don't have to travel that far inland to get to the key population centers, as well as a lot of the population is going to be within the city, and they're going to be more subject to coercion because they're not going to be living off the land. This is one of the most urban countries in Latin America. So you put all these things together, vulnerable population, questionable rule. Venezuela's continuously be reported as one of the most dangerous countries in the world. So you're probably dealing with a lot of people with somewhat resentment on the ground as far as economic opportunities, or dealing with quality of life issues. You don't have to put boots on the ground necessarily. As I said, they were subject to this influence. So when you put all these things together, you really, and then you couple that with an annoying leader, for lack of better phrasing, because you have now don't get me wrong, before this, it was big stuff coming out of Venezuela. Hugo Chavez walked out with his chest out. Maduro walked out with his chest out. As far as being defiant, courting countries such as China and Russia in the Western Hemisphere. And this is things that go back to the 1902-1903 Venezuelan crisis. The biggest threat these countries have is not that they are spawning or they have the industrial capacity or base to challenge American power, but they will be a platform for a stronger power to come in the Western Hemisphere and to attack or basically harangue or bother the United States and seek influence. And this is very important, especially in a world when we're seeing the rise of China and India. And as well as Russia still has global ambitions as well, global security ambitions as well. I'll put it that way. So you have someone that's relatively annoying to the U.S., and then you couple that with the world's largest oil reserves, and you really can understand why the U.S. or President Trump administration really thought this had to be done. And I think the urgency of it all, the quickness of it all. This is obviously not a war of passion or bitterness from the U.S. because it was done so quick. It was meant to be innocuous. It was meant to be subtle. Get in, get out. So it wasn't a strong, like a drawn out war. There's no real passion, such as the passions on either side going on in North Korea, South Korea, or better yet, Russia, Ukraine right now, where there's really this bitter hatred. And these two sides really want to fight it out. This was the U.S. capitalizing within its backyard, trying to establish itself supremacy within the region. And this also gives the U.S. an opportunity to move further south in a changing global economy, an economy where energy is revolutionizing. AI is revolutionizing things. So as they're pushed forward, now you got a platform. Up to now, the most southern U.S. base has been Sotomayor in Honduras. If the U.S. is able to establish influence within Venezuela, within Caracas, you have one of the largest coastal cities in South America, especially on that Caribbean coast, to host possible U.S. power, which give you a foothold in South America directly next to all the lithium reserves that's going to be in countries such as Bolivia and Chile, as well as shale reserves that's out there in countries such as Argentina. So this moves the U.S. closer to South American influence, and give it a counterbalance to some of those other countries. As I said, despite its relations, U.S. isn't that established on South America as far as influence. It has influence, but it's more indirect. But now this will give them a foothold on the actual continent. So I also think this gives an opportunity for Trump to do what he really wanted to do, which is stop that Ukraine-Russia war. Before he tried to pressure the Middle East, and he wasn't getting much leeway with the Arab states in the Middle East or the Gulf states in the Middle East as far as trying to flood the oil market. This gives him hands on the largest oil reserve in the world. So the ability to negotiate with Russia now and say, look, calm down on this war in Ukraine, which Trump has been strongly against, or I'll flood the market with oil, and it's going to tank the price. And nobody can stop him if he has that influence within Venezuela. So I'm watching news like everyone else. Who knows what time is going to unveil or the next leadership steps within Venezuela. It's going to be interesting to come the next turn that the country goes into. We can all hope that it doesn't disintegrate into some type of power struggle, and there's some type of peaceful transfer of power. But this is also going to step up the game. I don't know what this means for Greenland. And also countries like China is looking at this. And they're licking their lips at Taiwan right now. And I really think that this was always the case. And if the U.S. been nice in the past to countries, it's probably what's happenstance. Because they felt as though they had enough global influence to get what they wanted to get through with conversation and coercion. But as the world become more competitive, it become more regional due to powers asserting their authority within their regions. You're going to see a lot more direct power dynamics play out because big players in the world are not going to have time to play around. They're going to establish their influence, exert their influence as needed. So really interested in your thoughts. What do you think about the Venezuela invasion and the ouster of the Venezuelan leadership of President Nicolas Maduro? By the way, I don't think either side politically, which I don't like to get too much into, but I don't think politically either side likes this very much. The left is not going to like this because it's dictatorial, authoritarian, and the right or American First crowd isn't going to like this because what is American First about this? This is seen as one of the reasons they voted for Trump, which is no foreign wars. And they're more focused on trying to secure a better quality of life in the United States as opposed to asserting some moral authority abroad for whatever reasons that may be. So that's going to be interesting to see play out as well. But love to see your thoughts below on this recent ouster of the Maduro regime. It looks like an end to the socialist regime in Venezuela. Who knows? Time will tell. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, take care. Bantu up.